Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our seminar, National Academic Integrity Network seminar on what to do about AI text generators, next step for educators, what I term the AI squared problem, academic integrity and artificial intelligence, the two AIs. It's great to see such a great sign up. We're already coming close to 200 people for this, which is one of the largest seminars that we've had to date. Just to flag people about the significant resource that NAIN is for Ireland and internationally. As I've gone through the attendee list here, I see we have quite a number of international delegates attending, and to point out that these events are recorded and that there's now a significant resource of information on NAIN up on the QQI YouTube channel. I'll pass over to the chair of the National Academic Integrity, Billy Kelly, who will introduce our speaker for today. Billy.
Thank you, Porrick. Good morning, all. My name is Billy Kelly, and I'm the chair of the National Academic Integrity Network. And on behalf of the network, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you all to this, the 10th of the network's webinars dealing with academic integrity matters. And as with all our webinars, please note this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to watch on the QQI YouTube channel next week. And if you go to that channel, you'll find all our previous webinars there as well. Clearly, the rise of AI, in particular the arrival of ChatGPT, has moved the dial in higher education about the challenges artificial intelligence pose to traditional ways of teaching and learning, and especially to the integrity and validity of some of the means of assessment in use in higher education. And the numbers here, as Porrick has mentioned, are eloquent testimony to the recognition of that challenge and the need to reflect on and adapt our teaching, learning and assessment practices. I'd like to introduce our speaker at today's webinar, Anna Mills. Anna teaches writing at the College of Marin, a public community college in California, and previously taught at City College of San Francisco for 17 years. Her recent focus has been on AI text generators and the place of these technologies in students' writing. This has included a curated collection of articles, a set of sample essays, a list of strategies for mitigating educational harms associated with large language models. And in addition to this, she leads professional development workshops on open educational resources and collaborative annotation practices for students. And I think that focus on students' writing and their critical engagement with the written word is particularly relevant to the discussions taking place in higher education at this time. In today's webinar, What to Do About AI Text Generators, Next Steps for Educators, Anna will explore how we might respond to the capabilities of large language models such as ChatGPT and offer some practical steps that we could consider. Just before we turn the floor over to Anna, to note, we'll be using Slido for the questions and answers, which will follow the presentation. And if you'd like to join now to submit questions throughout the presentation, you can do so by going to slido.com, using the code 5255899, or you can download the Slido app and input that code 5255899. We'll endeavour to answer as many questions as possible at the end, but if we don't have time for all of them, we'll respond to them in an FAQ sheet and make this available to participants. Anna, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. So I want to just share with you what I'm going to talk about tonight. First, I'll just give a brief background on AI text generators and ChatGPT. I'll talk about some of the specific academic integrity considerations related to them and some options for ways to respond. And I'll end with a set of resources for you, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So here's the Slido information again, if you want to just look at that number again, so you can have that up. If questions occur to you as I'm talking, feel free to throw them in the Slido Q&A at any time. And I'm not sure if there's upvoting functionality, but if you do see an option to upvote, that'd be really helpful to let us know which questions are most interesting to you of the other questions. If you'd like, you can also follow along with these slides. There's a bit.ly link there. It's bit.ly, what to do, NAIN. So what are AI text generators? ChatGPT is one example of this class of software models, technically called large language models. They essentially produce mostly original writing in response to a prompt. So here's an example, just a screenshot of ChatGPT. I'd asked it to write an essay describing the ways in which Twitter might improve or degrade academic discourse. And you can just see the very first short paragraph of 5 paragraphs that it generated almost instantly. And so here's another example where I asked it to describe the differences between Martin Luther King's rhetorical style and Gandhi's. What do those differences suggest about their philosophies and leadership styles? And it produced a fairly credible description of some differences in rhetorical style, describing Martin Luther King's voice, contrasting that with Gandhi's simple, direct, and unassuming speaking style. So this is all ChatGPT here. Now, before we go on, I wanted to just invite you to share. I think emotions play a big role in how we respond and how we think about this. And I've just been getting a sense of how many emotions are out there around this. And they really run the gamut. So I wonder if it would be neat to get a sense in a word cloud just from you of how are you feeling at the moment about the role of this technology in education? Where are we starting from? And if you go to, I'm sorry, I'm throwing 2 platforms at you, but this one is a Menti, MENTI.com. And it has the code 43221840, or you can do the QR code. So I'll just leave that up for a second and see what feelings there are. For me, it's been really helpful to watch my own reactions change over time since June, when I started experimenting with GPT-3, the predecessor to ChatGPT, and just felt an intense surge of adrenaline, sort of both fear and excitement, and kind of fascination. And so just watching that gave me a little bit of distance from the emotions, and so I can kind of watch what's going on. Let's see what words we're getting. Wow, got a lot already here. So yeah, it's so interesting. The other time I did this, also worried and excited and curious were right up there at the top. Apprehensive, concerned. And I can share this at the end. People are still uncertain, intrigued, exciting, excitement, alarmed, frustrated, fascinated, hopeful, nervous, threatened. Yes. Okay. So I will share out the graphic at the end. Maybe we can take a look later. People are still going to that. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. I just want us to kind of stay aware of those feelings as we dive into this together. So should we see these tools as a threat? Should we see them as, well, as a tool? Should we see them as both? What approaches should we consider? I don't claim to have all the answers, but I'll share with you what I do know so far. Very basic context. So ChatGPT was created by the company OpenAI. It was released in December, I think actually November 30th. It's a company that's largely funded by Microsoft. And this is a more user-friendly version of the software GPT-3, which actually has been around for about 2 years. And those are considered the most capable language models that are currently publicly available. But it's also worth knowing that there are other examples. There are open source language models, and Google and Meta also have built models that are not publicly available. And what does a language model do? It can take in and incorporate background information, sources, quotations, lists of ideas. So you can give it a lot more than just the short prompts that I showed in the screenshots. You can feed it up to around 2,000 words. Anything that would help it produce the piece of writing. And it will integrate that information into its output. And it does offer mostly original word combinations. So it's generating this series of words based on its statistical analysis of huge volumes of text, mostly pulled from the internet, Reddit, Wikipedia. And it was trained on that text over a long period of time. And now it uses that analysis that it's built up to create these outputs. It works by predicting a likely next word. It's not copying sentences or paragraphs from other human sources or from Wikipedia or anything like that, for the most part. Occasionally it'll sneak in a phrase that's copied, but the other thing to know is that it does produce new outputs for the same prompt. It might sometimes duplicate, but you can't count on it to produce the same thing for the next user who asks the same question. So 2 students might put in the same prompt and get different results. What's the quality of those outputs? It's often sort of fairly solid, passable academic prose in some respects, grammatically correct, on topic. It's a fairly smooth academic style, and it will often sound plausible. Limitations, however, it does have some significant limitations. I think the first thing to note is that it's a statistical model. I like the phrase that Alex Hanna and Emily Bender have coined for it, that of a mathy math. It's not, a robot intelligence. It's not sentient. It's not understanding the concepts that the words are talking about. So I think that's important to highlight. That leads to that there's no coherent intention behind its text. So, people will ask it to talk about itself. There's no self-awareness. There's no actual belief behind the things that are coming out of it. It might respond one way one time and the opposite another time, or from one sentence to the next, it might change positions. And I think I like researcher Janelle Shane's explanation that it's trained on a constant game of what would the humans do next, or what would the humans say next. So it's just generating streams of likely quasi-human text. Now, it's important to know that it's, it might seem like math, or it might seem neutral, but it is very much formed by human text, the human text that it was trained on, human written text. And so it does reflect the contents of that text and the biases of that text. Its outputs are skewed as the internet is skewed toward developed nations, English, toward, you could say, various forms of privilege. And despite many efforts to eradicate that bias, it's very difficult because it's structurally in there based on the data that it's been fed. And, as a word predictor, it's not checking the things that it says against external sources. It was trained on all of this text, but it's not referencing specific texts when it generates an output. It's just sort of statistically predicting the next word. So it will often fabricate sources and facts. It will fudge. It will occasionally give real sources. That's happening more frequently, but you can't count on it to give a real source, and it will sometimes make them up. And the things that it makes up often do sound like truth. There are some apps that are sort of built on top of it that can pull on real sources. We may see that increasingly. And you'll notice that its style is somewhat generic and bland. It struggles to come up with specific details or really meaningful transitions to connect one idea to the next. So you might notice that as a limitation. And one limitation is you can only give it around 2,000 words. If you wanted it to, say, analyze a whole book, you would have to feed it one section at a time and sort of play some games there to try to get it to take in more than the 2,000 words. So is this different from plagiarism if students use this to generate answers to writing prompts? And sort of a big question, how is it different if it is? Most of the time, these outputs will pass plagiarism checks because they're not copied from other sources. They're recombined. And I think a bigger picture distinction is just that our social norms have not been fully formed around these text generators. So students who see plagiarism as wrong may not see text generator use as wrong. These may be perceived as legitimate tools and not as cheating, since the norms have not been formed. And part of that is that they are in use in professional settings beyond the classroom, and they are accepted in many settings for web writing, for blogging, for marketing writing, search engine optimization, and for coding. These are increasingly becoming part of the writing environment in those professional settings. And I think the other consideration for academic integrity is just that the capabilities are changing very quickly with not very much notice. So if we're looking for how to flag it, if that students are using this tool, we need to just be aware that things may change from one day to the next. We may be looking for sources that are not real, that are fabricated. That was true in the past, and now increasingly it's generating real sources and URLs. And we've already seen 3 updates since November 30th, where ChatGPT outputs have somehow improved. And we have heard that there are significant improvements still to be released from OpenAI. So we really can't count on any limitations to be stable. So how should we respond? I'm just going to put out some ideas. My own current take is that we need to look at a combination of approaches that I'm going to talk about in sort of 3 broad areas. One is in pedagogy, another in policies, and another sort of controversial one is in identification of AI text. So I want to just really emphasize that, one of the first things that we can turn to, I think, if we're concerned that students might auto-generate their assignment is just really tried and true, and probably something that we're thinking about anyway and prioritizing anyway, which is just to emphasize the purpose of the learning activity, the purpose of the writing assignment, and to think, design for student engagement, for meaningful writing assignments, and for discussing with students what they'll get out of the wrestling with the writing process, so that it's not about the product, that they see that the value of the writing assignment is more in the process. And we can just emphasize that idea that writing is a process that's sort of been developed in part because it helps us to think, it helps us to clarify our ideas, and it helps us to arrive at insights that we didn't have when we began the process of trying to put words together. And so I think just highlighting that is a first step toward helping students understand why they would want to form their own words, and in response to the learning activity that we've set up with that in mind. Beyond that, I think a pretty low-hanging fruit is to make some explicit policies about AI, and we can start simple with that. You know, mine is really very simple, just making it clear that they should only use a text generator if the specific writing assignment calls for it, and they should disclose which part of the text comes from the AI. So that transparency is just at the heart of it. And at the end of the talk, we'll offer a resource list that has many more samples of policy statements, some of them much more involved. I have a colleague who suggested that we can simply extend the practice of asking students to affirm that the work they're submitting is their own, to make that explicitly about AI as well, that they can affirm that it's not AI generated. And now we come to a really controversial approach, identifying AI text. Will we have software that enables us or students to clearly tell if a particular paragraph was generated by AI or not? You may be aware that there are some tools out there for that. They are not 100% accurate by any means. One was just released, I think it was yesterday, by OpenAI, the same company, with a lot of caveats. They explicitly said that it only labels 26% of AI generated text as likely generated by AI. 26% is not that high, and it still labels 9% of human written text as likely written by AI. So there are a lot of false positives and false negatives. Another tool is called GPT-0 that was just created over New Year's by a Princeton student. And then there's an older tool that's still available, also created by OpenAI. And there's a version for educators, AIwritingcheck.org, that has some guidance on how to use it. And these tools will give you sort of a probability that the text is human written versus probability that it's AI generated. However, there's a real concern that if these are used for flagging academic dishonesty, even for accusing a student of academic dishonesty, that we will have many cases of students who actually wrote their papers being flagged as AI generated, because there are so many false positives still with these tools, as much as 10 to 20% of the time. And the other issue that we should be aware of is that these tools can be bypassed with various tricks, including using paraphrase software like Quillbot to paraphrase the AI generated text. Then the tools often will not recognize the text as AI generated after that. So in addition to that, there are concerns about data rights and privacy for students. If their work is submitted to these third-party tools, is that a violation of their rights to the data? What will the detection programs do with the data? Are institutions vetting this? And one possible workaround might be to ask students to run the detection program on their own work and give them an alternative option. But I think we should, watch this space, because we know that Turnitin has put out a preview of their text detection system that they say they will release soon, preview in form of a YouTube video about it. You can't use it yet. OpenAI supposedly is working on additional approaches to detection, including watermarking the text. But will there be a way to stop people from getting around these systems by paraphrasing with things like Quillbot? When we get a wider range of language models beyond ChatGPT, won't that make it even more difficult to detect reliably? Many people are pessimistic that we can get this text detection to work well. But on the other hand, we have all these smart engineers who have created this product, and who knows what they might be able to do. So my question that I've been wrestling with is, could these tools be used in some way collaboratively with students so that it doesn't feel like a gotcha tool, so that there's room for some doubt and discussion, since we know they have these errors, but so that they might still help us to create a culture of transparency and expectation that that when we use AI tools, that we disclose that we share what part of the text we put together and what part came from the AI, and that might help in the learning process and in the assessment process for students and for teachers. And I think another question going forward is, does government have a role in regulating or promoting such technology? Certainly, it's been observed that it's relevant to other spheres, such as public discussions, misinformation, sort of the flooding of the public sphere with AI-generated text. There might be other reasons to support AI text detection in society. But beyond that controversial question, which I'll leave you with to think about, I'm sure you have your own opinions about it, I did want to highlight some other kinds of options for pedagogy. And, some of those, as you might imagine, would include in-class writing that might be done in combination with out-of-class writing or instead of. Also assigning steps in the writing process. We know writing teachers, have been practicing this for many years with a lot of research behind it. The idea that we help students sort of reflect, maybe starting with annotation of a text, even collaborative annotation, pre-writing, brainstorming, outlines, drafts, revisions, peer review, sort of walking students through steps in the writing process is not going to stop them from using AI, but it's going to provide a support for the process, and it's going to make it a little trickier to use AI to coordinate all those different pieces. Another way to do that is by asking students to use track changes and to share the evolution of their writing. We can hold conferences with students about their writing before or after they turn it in. And alternately, we might ask students to record audio or video notes about their writing to get a sense of it beyond just the words on the page. Now, many people have asked if we can design writing tasks that text generators are not good at. And remember that maybe they wouldn't create an A paper, but would they create a C paper? It's not easy to do this, and it's getting a bit harder. But there are some possibilities. As I mentioned, analysis of longer texts is more complicated with the AI. Assignments that articulate sort of nuanced relationships between ideas or between different texts can be more difficult. Analysis of current events, not in the training data. These models were, the model ChatGPT was, I believe the training data ends in 2021, so it doesn't know about things that happened after that. However, students can feed it information from current news articles. Requiring verifiable sources is another important piece that can make it a little trickier to use a text generator to complete a writing task. Another option is to ask students to write about images, video, and audio. That's something where they would have to describe those things and feed that description to ChatGPT in order to get any kind of meaningful output about it. And a variant of that is to ask them to incorporate points from class discussion. So to refer to classmates' points in their papers. That would be also trickier. Now, a few approaches that I have real concerns about would be not assigning writing. It's possible we could go to multiple choice in some disciplines, but of course, as a writing teacher, I would make the case that writing is an essential way to develop understanding and original reflection and to clarify ideas that we shouldn't jettison just because of this. Some have suggested that we should go to handwritten work. My concern is that that's not how students will write in other settings in their lives. And it poses difficulties for many students, especially students with disabilities. Another approach that we've seen in some districts is to ban access on a network. However, this, of course, students would still have access through cellular data, and we might have differential access in that case. So it seems a bit ineffective. I am not a big fan of surveillance. However, of course, in-class writing could be said to be a form of surveillance. That I can see, but remotely surveilling out-of-class writing that students are doing in their homes does bring a lot of privacy and data rights concerns with it, and it has, I think, been shown to be biased and inaccurate in some cases. But it's interesting. I found, of course, we're going to draw the line in different places around this. I asked the question whether track changes was surveillance or not on Twitter recently. And there was quite a range of opinion. 58% of the respondents said they thought that it was fine to ask students to share their whole writing process via track changes, and around 42% found it to be intrusive or inappropriate. So I think that's an ongoing debate. It'd be good to have discussion on that. So I'm curious if we can do a quick kind of poll here with Mentimeter. I'm going to assume that we could agree, at least in principle, on encouraging intrinsic motivation and emphasizing the purpose of writing with students. So beyond that, I wonder, I'm going to go to the next Mentimeter slide. And you can use the same Mentimeter code or QR code. And you're going to see a bunch of the options that I just described on the screen, and it's just going to ask you to rate them, depending on how much you think we should prioritize each of those approaches to ChatGPT and academic integrity, or you can rank them at 0 if you think those are bad approaches. So I hope you'll take a second to sort of make your own rankings, and we'll see where people fall on some of these ideas. Okay, let's see. Still moving. Yeah, so interesting that just having explicit policies and affirmations seems to be the most popular at this point. Steps in the writing process, conferencing are high up there. Incorporating multimedia into assignments, and switching to forms of assessment other than writing is also pretty high. So then the tools for identifying AI text are sort of a little lower, but still in the running. So that's really interesting to see. And I'd be happy to share the results of this at the end as well. Okay. I'm going to go on just because in the interest of time and to get to your questions. So, the next questions, beyond academic integrity, I think, but are connected with them with the academic integrity are, how are we addressing these tools with our students? Are we teaching about them? Are we giving students some kind of guidance around what these tools mean beyond just saying don't use them? And are we considering using them in our pedagogy with students? Are we considering asking students to use them in some way to support their learning? I won't get to delve too deeply into those, but I just want to sort of start with, I think the least controversial idea is that we're going to be teaching some form of critical AI literacy in the future as part of digital literacy and information literacy. And that we can sort of take steps toward that as we are learning about the nature of these tools. We can be sharing readings with students, and we can specifically just introduce the concept that this is statistically generated text. It's not coming from, a sentient being, and that it's not authoritative, it's not neutral, it might have bias, it might have inaccuracy in it. And certainly it could be useful to teach our students to recognize problems in the kinds of outputs they're going to see from this kind of AI text. Now, could it be useful to incorporate it into our teaching? I think there's a lot of excitement around that. And I have had a lot of excitement myself. I'm presenting at a conference about teaching with AI. And I've also kind of pulled back a little bit as I've learned more about some of the concerns with these models and some of the risks. So I would, at this point, would urge a little bit of caution and just, put some questions to you to reflect on before jumping into saying, go for it, generate your first draft and then revise it. Well, let's ask ourselves, what about the opportunity costs? Is using it in the classroom really better than what we were doing before for student learning? Is it better than the alternative teaching practices we maybe were interested in exploring or considering learning about? Is it really better than the alternative? And if we're assigning students to use it, are we ready to explain the technology? Are we ready to share what the pitfalls are? Are we ready to test that students they really have the judgment and the expertise to identify any problems in what it's saying? Are we ready to share concerns around data privacy with students? So the information they're inputting into the tool is going to the company. And are we comfortable with that in our classrooms? Are we comfortable encouraging them to do that or requiring them to do that? And I think I do want to kind of emphasize that, you know, even if we do find a good use for this in the classroom, it's worth asking, you know, is critiquing a machine-generated paragraph better critical thinking practice than critiquing a human-written paragraph that we might provide as a sample, or critiquing another student's paragraph? So we're making a choice between interacting with the machine-generated text and the human-written text. And so I think we want to have that really clear if we're choosing to do it. And that said, there are many very exciting ways it could be used. And, you know, I'm starting to explore using it for my own learning, trying to code with it as a tutor, using it, asking it for revision suggestions, generating ideas with it. It's very attractive and compelling, and I'm sure people will be exploring this, but I think it's worth kind of asking these hard questions about new uses of it. So I'm kind of got to the end of my formal presentation, to the resources section. I just wanted to share with you this bit.ly. The AI Writing EDU is a resource list that has news articles, analysis, educators' takes, and sample policies, and a set of samples of AI-generated academic writing, as well as more information on AI text identification. And there's also an article that I wrote with my colleague Lauren Goodlad that has some elaboration on the suggestions that I've gone through in this presentation. This is a peek at that resource area. It's hosted by the Writing Across the Curriculum Clearinghouse from Colorado State University. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So this is the sort of the table of contents of the resource list, and it's really gotten to be way too long. So, but I think you will hopefully find what you're looking for there. And if not, you can make suggestions. It's a Google Doc. So you can jump in and let me know what's missing too. And this is there's a set of sample AI generated essays, around maybe around 15 of them. So if you don't want to jump in and interact with ChatGPT directly, you can go ahead and just browse some of the samples to see what it does in the way of different kinds of academic essays. So it is now time for Q&A. There's a reminder of the Slido code 525-5899. And I look forward to your questions. And you're welcome to get in touch with me, or on Twitter, or through my email. And I'm gonna stop my share at this point. But thank you so much for listening. Let's see.
Anna, thank you so much for that, right? Really interesting. There are loads of questions and in some case comments, right? Okay, in Slido. Some of them are probably for you, and probably quite a lot of them are for ourselves, right? Okay, to think about. If I could start with a few of them. If I take the first one there, that highlighted one, the need to look at how we assess rather than the artifacts we assess. So this is much more about process probably than the specific. Do we need to look at other ways of assessing student knowledge other than content?
Sure. I mean, I think it opens up an opportunity for us to sort of question our assessment practices, and that might be healthy for many reasons. And I think that, you know, I would still make that case that that reading and writing are sort of so central to what academia is, and how we pursue knowledge and understanding. and communication that we wouldn't want to sort of say it doesn't matter if the student gets the word to get words together or not, or that they never need to write, or that we can just sort of skip that. In part because what ChatGPT comes up with might not be what they would have started with if they had wrestled with it. It comes up with a certain starting point, but that's not necessarily an ideal model or the direction that they maybe their own inclinations or their own thinking might have taken them. So that's worth thinking about.
And if I turn to the second one there, do you anticipate an increased need for teacher intervention? So things like random oral examinations, right? Okay, to confirm that it's a student's own work.
I mean, I think that I described it as conferences, and I think that is one of the approaches that could be useful. I think it's sort of certainly possible, and there have been many documented cases now that students have turned in work that was generated by ChatGPT or GPT-3, and it has gone unnoticed. So it's certainly possible that students would do that. And how do we want to respond to that possibility? It really goes to the core of our philosophy around academic integrity, and trying to build trust with students, and still make sure that they are learning as we want them to.
I'm just going to keep going, right? Okay, on these, right? Okay. To what extent do you think the onus is on us to reimagine our pedagogies, policies, curricula, assessment paradigms, rather than policing students? Is really where should the balance of effort go?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think if we could just reimagine our pedagogies in a way that would be fabulous for student learning without needing to police them, then that would be wonderful. I think I'm skeptical that that's the case, because I do think that that writing is valuable, that there's something that students do need to learn from that. I often write to come to a judgment, to make a decision, to assess information, to deepen my understanding of what I've read. And so do we need to police students to make sure that they're still doing their own writing? I mean, that's a question of how we want to handle the possibility of cheating. But I mean, certainly we need to do our work in being ready to guide students in this new territory, and we need to be willing to question our pedagogies. But I don't think that that's necessarily best for student learning, that we just say, okay, great, I won't know if you wrote it or not in the future, and I guess I'll just have to deal with that. I mean, that might not be the best for the student learning, because then how do we design a learning activity when we don't know if they're going to use it or not? And when some might and some might not, that I think that there might be a role for some form of transparency, either as a norm that we establish through trust, or as facilitated by some kind of tool for identifying and separating human written text from AI written text. So yeah, I think these are the discussions we have to continue to wrestle with, of course.
I see, and again, should students reference chat? And I think the answer to that is yes, they should. Ian saying of mansplaining as a service, right? Okay, well, I have to remember that. If I turn to Brendan's one, is it a good thing that AI is opening conversation about the values and purpose of education?
Absolutely, yeah, I think that is valuable. And if it's helping us turn toward intrinsic motivation and clarifying when is it meaningful to wrestle with the writing process, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah, I would agree with that.
And again, right, okay, one, and sort of this is a composite from a few. Insofar as GPT is scraping information from the web, is it really original? And what about the inherent biases, right? Okay, that may be there, you know, if it's treating all this data as reliable or accurate.
Yeah, I definitely don't think we should treat its outputs as reliable or accurate. I think I'm really concerned when people say, oh, and now I'm using it as a tutor, because it's very difficult to separate the plausible things that it says from that are completely inaccurate from the ones that are accurate, especially for students who are just learning the material. Imagine having a tutor and you had to go look up everything they said and double check it. So I think that we need to help students understand that and learn to recognize those problems and not see it as an authority. I think if we do ask students to cite it, I think that it's important to note that it's not an authoritative source the way that an academic research article is. It's a bunch of generated text put together. It's not a human nobody's standing behind it.
And again, right, okay, and there's the comment, right, the futures here is just not evenly distributed, and about AI not going away. And should we be engaging with AI with a view of redesigning, right, okay, the particular context here is a further education college, but I think it's probably true of all educational institutions, right, okay, of longer term. And probably the answer to that is, yes, we should be engaging with a redesign of our learning practices, our assessment practice, and even our physical spaces. And again, a comment about embracing the change, right? Okay. Do we need this broader discussion with students on the value of higher education? I think this goes to the fundamentals, at least in part, of what AI will be able to do.
Right. I mean, I think it's helpful, even if we want to embrace AI and recognize that this will be increasingly a part of our lives in many forms, and that probably writers in the future will, have many tools accessible to them, that we might want to sort of maintain an awareness of the nature of those tools and the distinction between what we can do as humans and what the tools are doing.
Again, which we can't ban it, we can't hold back this tide. And Brendan's point, don't think detection can win the arms race, right? Okay, and guessing, right? Okay, that's the trust, right? Okay, if your feelings on this as well, Anna.
Yeah, I see the difficulty of we certainly. I'm not advocating a gotcha approach, because I do see the problems with AI detection. However, I think of it somewhat in parallel to cybersecurity, where no, it's never going to be perfect. It would have to continue to evolve, but it might be that we could have some tools that would be useful in helping us distinguish one tool among many for when a student has written something and when it's not their own work. And I think that I'm sorry, I want to jump to that question about student demoralization.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question.
I tend to what I'd like to do is build sort of introductory activities for students where they're learning about critical AI literacy in ways that highlight what it can't do, that allow students to reflect on and notice their own capacity for judgment, for self-reflection, for connecting with the real world, for judging sources, for reasoning. And of course, that will evolve as AI evolves. But I think that it can actually be encouraging. If we assign students to find those problems, or to reflect on the insight that they were able to get to that the AI didn't get to, I think that it could actually be empowering for students and a way for students to build that kind of metacognitive awareness of their own learning process.
Anna, you touched in your conversation on privacy issues, right? Okay, for students, and there are those issues, but there are also IP issues, right? Okay, the lack of attribution, right? Even if for Creative Commons materials, etc. What are your considerations on that?
Yeah, I think that we'll see a lot more discussion of that coming. Sort of it's gotten further in relation to AI generated images. There have been some lawsuits where artists whose work showed up in kind of just slightly altered form were objecting to the use of their own images in the training of those image generators. And it'll be really interesting to see where that goes. My understanding is that in future, some of the image generators may allow artists to, opt out of having their work included. I don't know if there might be something parallel for text as well. But I think we should recognize that, any ideas that it's representing are coming from humans, right? Whose texts are in the training data. They're not coming from ChatGPT.
I pulled one of the questions up to the top there. I think it's really an interesting one from Patricia O'Sullivan in relation to equality and inclusion. Will AI generated text such as ChatGPT enable a more equal playing field for students with disabilities?
Yeah, I think this is really exciting and also somewhat concerning. I've seen some pieces like in the Washington Post about folks with disabilities who are using this tool and finding it incredibly helpful. I also had, people posting back on Twitter about their own communication disorders and their concern that using the tool would sort of put words in their mouth that ChatGPT couldn't read their mind and that it would supply text, but it might lead them astray as well. So I think there will definitely be uses as assistive technology, but there will still be limitations and concerns around that as well.
There's a question there that's popping there. How can we help university administrators understand the workload impact of trying to assess around ChatGPT? Because I think that is a real concern, that the additional vigilance required in a world of AI will just increase the workload, right? Okay, of those who are grading students' work.
Absolutely, and I recognize that most of the practices that I put up on my list are ones that involve more time, conferencing with students and assigning the steps in the writing process and having students refer to class discussion and redesigning our prompts, and all of it is time intensive. And so I'm hoping that can be part of any institutional discussion about policy. If policies are made, then the discussion about how will teachers assess for compliance with those policies should be part of that, and how will we be supported in that.
And again, I just pulled one up. We're more or less at the end of our time, right? Okay, but Breed Lane is identifying a tweet from Thomas Lancaster, and the viability or not of a lecture awarding is 0 for work they think has been produced by AI. And that's an interesting conundrum. I don't know whether you have an answer for that or not.
I mean, I've been wondering that myself, because if you can't prove that it was produced by the AI, how can you award a 0 for it? And if the detection tools are not foolproof, I think it calls the whole system into question. One approach is to allow students to demonstrate their competency in some other way, or to redo the work, or to defend it orally. And that's something that I do in regards to plagiarism. So I'd be interested in exploring kind of those kinds of options. But I don't have a silver bullet for that.
And just as an end, and I'm not really posing this as a question to you, Anna, but just I think it's an interesting observation from Ambrose, right? Okay, to what extent does this mean we can leap into higher cognitive domains, right? Okay, earlier in the student's learning journey. Anna, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you so much, right? Okay, for this. You've sparked loads of thoughts, loads of issues, right? Okay, that we're going to have to grapple with in one form or another. To audience members today, we have captured all the questions. There are many questions, right? Okay, and comments that people didn't get together. We will put these together and share these, right? Okay, with participants. Some of them are questions, and others really are markers for discussions, right? Okay, that we have to have in the education community here in Ireland, but presumably abroad as well. Anna, thank you very much, right? Okay, for this morning's webinar.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone.